tra uomo e donna.
Complementarity. Pope Francis reflects on the harmony of man and woman and the beauty of the sacrament of marriage. Somber anniversary. Survivors and rescuers join dignitaries in marking 2 years since the fatal Boston Marathon bombings. For the record, what does the church say about a possible nuclear deal with Iran? And he now belongs to the ages. A nation remembers our 16th president on this 150th anniversary of his death. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, April 15th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. Tonight, taxes are on the minds of many Americans. They're facing a midnight deadline to file the 2014 income tax returns. President Obama went to North Carolina today pitching his ideas for tax reform. Meanwhile, here in D.C., a new presidential hopeful touts a plan he calls pro-family. Catherine Szeltner reports from Capitol Hill tonight.
Yes, Brian, Florida Senator Marco Rubio laid out his own tax reform plan today. He spoke at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank here in D.C. While Rubio has addressed tax reform before, it was his first time as a presidential candidate. Rubio and Republican Senator Mike Lee worked together on the tax plan, which they first released last month. They say their plan would cut taxes for 90% of American families. The centerpiece is a proposed child tax credit, creating a new $2,500 credit per child. Rubio and Lee say it's not financial aid, it's pro-family tax reform that levels the playing field.
But if an individual family decides to make an investment in people, in our future, in human beings, all we're asking is that the tax code recognize that as well as an investment in the future, in individuals that are going to be the cornerstone of America's future. We're not approaching this with the thought process that someone's going to sit down with their accountant every tax year and say, what you really need to do is have 2 more kids. I don't think people are going to make decisions that way, and that's not our intention. That being said, it's a reality that raising children in the 21st century is expensive.
Rubio jokes that he's done his part by having 4 kids. Both senators stress the plan is not final. They say it's a project and they're looking for improvements. Rubio continued with his yesterday is over campaign theme, using phrases like the new era today. The presidential candidate wasn't afraid to take some jabs at the president and Obamacare. We'll be watching his approach develop as more GOP hopefuls prepare to jump into the race. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Catherine Szeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Now, some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. Pope Francis says there is much to be done in order to give due recognition to women in society and in the church.
La rimozione della differenza, infatti, è il problema, non la soluzione.
The Pope saying that repressing the difference between men and women is the problem, not the solution. Continuing his weekly teaching on the family, he said that in God's plans, sexual differences are not meant to lead to subordination. They foster unity and procreation. The Pope says this reciprocity brings harmony to the human family. Boston Cardinal Sean O'Malley urges Pope Francis and his fellow cardinal advisors to take up bishops' responsibility to protect children. O'Malley, the Pope's point man on sex abuse, raises the case of a controversial bishop appointment in Chile. Bishop Juan Barros has been met with unprecedented opposition from priests, deacons, and lay faithful in the diocese. They say he knew about and covered up offenses by one of Chile's most notorious clergy abusers. Barros denies any wrongdoing. The Vatican has defended his appointment. Our Rome correspondent Alan Holdren is joining us. And Alan, the Council of 9 Cardinals who advised Pope Francis are meeting there at the Vatican. What's the status of their work?
Well, they're continuing to talk about this reform process that Pope Francis started more than a year ago. This is the 9th time that they've met. They're a council of 9 cardinals from all over the world, and they're speaking in these days, which they've just ended 3 days of meetings, about this reform process and their methods. Are they going about it the right way? Are they efficient enough in the way that they're doing it? So going back and doing a little bit of housekeeping just on the processes that they put in place to be able to study the Vatican and how to improve its efficiency.
So one of those members on that council is Cardinal Pell, who recently moved out of the Vatican Bank. Alan, what's the story behind that?
This has been several months coming. They did mention that they were going to do this. He's now done it. He's moved from the tower that's in the back of the Vatican Gardens that was once John the 23rd's tower. It was his residence during the Second Vatican Council. They've moved from that location, which was out of the way, difficult to get to, into the actual Apostolic Palace, where there's a building for what was the APSA, which is this department for the Vatican that takes care of its properties. The APSA is being phased out, it appears. Just yesterday, 2 officials that were part of the APSA have been taken on by the Secretariat for the Economy, which is this department that Cardinal Pell heads, which is taking on the finances of the Vatican. So this is just one more step. Cardinal Pell has taken one more step closer to the Pope physically in moving his offices. There's also one more step in this process of streamlining the Vatican's financial activities.
And finally, very briefly, Alan, why is Pope Francis seeking the kinds of reforms that he's been working on?
Well, the cardinals asked him for this before they elected him. In the meetings that led up to his election, they said that they wanted a reform process. They wanted someone from outside of Italy to lead it, and he's just taking their advice. Proof of this is when the cardinals met a month ago to elect new members or to receive new members, they collected the opinions of these cardinals on the reform process. Part of the meetings in these days, they've been speaking about exactly what those cardinals said and implementing their ideas in this ongoing reform. Right?
Very interesting. Thank you. Our Alan Holdren in Rome. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Brian.
And Pope Francis gives a special greeting to the husband and daughter of Asia Bibi during today's general audience. She is the Pakistani Christian woman convicted of blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad. If her conviction is upheld by Pakistan's Supreme Court, she could be put to death. Her husband says Asia's 5-year imprisonment has devastated the family.
Since the day Asia Bibi was arrested, the family is totally destroyed, and without their mother, the children, especially the girls, cannot survive their life without their mother.
Bibi's lawyer is appealing to the international community to put pressure on the Pakistani government to release her. ISIS terrorists capture 3 villages in Iraq's western Anbar province. These pictures coming out of Iraq show people fleeing the town of Ramadi as troops from the Islamic State and Iraq's government clash. Earlier this month, government troops regained control of Tikrit from the militants. That was seen as a key victory. Meanwhile, Iraq's prime minister says his forces intend to liberate the region now under attack. They will then take aim at the northern city of Mosul, held by Islamic State fighters. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi discussed the military campaign in Washington today. He met with President Obama at the White House yesterday. Well, the UN says the presumed drowning of 400 migrants in the Mediterranean Sea is one of the deadliest migrant tragedies in the last decade. The Italian Coast Guard rescued about 140 people Monday from the shipwreck off Libya's coast. Survivors say there were as many as 550 on board. These latest deaths are part of a larger phenomenon of migrants embarking in ships that never make it to port. Since Friday, the Italian Coast Guard has rescued nearly 10,000 people trying to cross from North Africa to Italy. Former New England Patriot Aaron Hernandez is sentenced to life in prison for a first-degree murder conviction. Hernandez, who once had a $40 million contract, left court today in handcuffs. Earlier, he looked at his weeping mother and fiancée, mouthing, "It's okay." Hernandez is convicted in the June 2013 shooting death of 27-year-old Odin Lloyd. Lloyd was dating the sister of Hernandez's fiancée. The victim's mother is speaking out following today's ruling.
Just like God has left his footprint in the sand. My baby footprint is in my heart forever.
Patriots cut Hernandez from the team within hours of his arrest. 2 years ago, a joyful day suddenly turned tragic. The 2013 Boston Marathon remains etched in our minds. 2 bombs, killing 3 people, injuring 260. Jason Calvi joining us now to cover today's grim anniversary.
Ryan, this is one of the memorials near the bomb site. State leaders also unveiled 4 banners near there today. It comes as people around the country mark this anniversary with moments of silence, church bells, and remembering the unthinkable.
My girl.
Liz Norden's sons, Paul and JP, were on the sidelines watching the race 2 years ago. Surveillance video shows the convicted bomber placing a backpack next to them. They were soon rushed to the hospital.
You know, when my boys were hurt, I literally sat in the hospital and prayed that they lived.
They survived, but their lives are changed forever. Mother Olga was a campus minister at Boston University for 10 years. She remembers comforting students after a BU student was killed in the tragedy.
And he ran to me and he said, "Your family is here and we need you." And I ran to them at the front pews and I was with them and embracing the BU students who were mourning the loss of their loved ones.
Many touched by the bombing are turning tragedy into hope. The Norden family is now helping other amputees through a charity they set up.
You know, if you lose your leg to a horrific accident, you don't have the media coverage or the resources that my family was so blessed to have. So it's important that we try to help other amputees that don't have that resources.
And Mother Olga is drawing light out of darkness.
But we want to help them to remember that the memories of their loved one will always be alive.
The 21-year-old bomber was convicted last week. Next week begins the process of deciding if he'll receive life in prison or the death penalty. Mother Olga tells me her group of sisters will be praying tonight for healing and renewed hope. Brian.
Jason Calvi, thank you. Coming up, as Iran's president dismisses pressure from the U.S. Congress over a possible nuclear deal, we explore the church's stance. And a nation remembers Abraham Lincoln 150 years after the 16th president's tragic death. A bit of Wednesday wisdom from our foundress, Mother Angelica. Our interior life can be extremely painful because you can't share it and describe it. And God willed it so because it intensifies the purification. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. Iran's president dismisses pressure from the U.S. Congress over a preliminary deal on Iran's nuclear program. Hassan Rouhani says Tehran is dealing with world powers, not American lawmakers. Rouhani spoke to tens of thousands of Iranians, saying Iran is pursuing an agreement with a 6-member group. That group includes the U.S., Russia, China, Britain, France, and Germany. Rouhani warning that there will be no agreement if the termination of sanctions is not mentioned in a deal. His speech follows President Obama bowing to pressure from congressional Republicans and Democrats. The president agreed to sign compromise legislation giving Congress the right to review and possibly reject a nuclear deal with Iran. So where does the Catholic Church stand on this politically charged issue? Wyatt Goolsby is here to break that down for us tonight.
Brian, Catholic bishops here in the U.S. are joining with Pope Francis in prayer for negotiations with Iran. They're welcoming a potential framework for curbing Iran's nuclear ambitions, but they admit there is no easy solution. After months of talks between Iran and 6 other nations, Secretary of State John Kerry says he's confident a deal will be reached, but that could take time. So the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is sending a letter this week to Congress. Their message: support negotiations, don't undermine them. Bishop Oscar Cantu wrote that letter.
Friendship and relationships and peace are built on trust. And the only way trust can be built, can be gained is through negotiation, is through sitting down. It's not through threats.
Affinché sia un passo definitivo verso un mondo più sicuro e fraterno.
Bishop Cantu says he agrees with Pope Francis, who prays the framework for a deal will be a step toward a safer world. Bishop Cantu says a bill that would allow Congress to review a deal with Iran may be a good idea.
The more transparency, the better. The more eyes available. And in order to make the negotiations stronger.
But even if a deal is reached by the June 30th deadline, there is no guarantee Iran will keep its end of the bargain. Stephen White at the Ethics and Public Policy Center says the biggest challenge will be making sure Iran doesn't put a political spin on the church's push for peace.
There's an important role for the bishops to play in speaking out on these issues. There's also a danger of coming down too hard on one side and then being trapped by the course of events.
Bishop Cantu tells me he agrees that these are delicate negotiations and there's a risk involved when the bishops speak out. It is important to note that the church has not said all Catholics have to agree on this issue, but they do ask Catholics to pray for peace.
That's something we all can do. Thank you, Wyatt. Well, a Catholic priest who died when the Titanic sank 103 years ago could someday be recognized as a saint. Survivors say Father Thomas Biles refused 2 chances to board a lifeboat. He stayed to hear confessions, pray, and console those who would eventually go down with the ship. Around 1,500 people died when the Titanic sank in the North Atlantic 103 years ago this week. Now, a priest at Father Biles' former church in England is asking that his cause for beatification be opened. Flags are flying at half-mast in our nation's capital today, marking 150 years since Abraham Lincoln's death. Today, April 15th, marks exactly 150 years since the death of our 16th president. Lincoln died the morning after John Wilkes Booth shot him in Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C.
Lincoln stood in the box and bowed to the audience. The band played Hail to the Chief. Then, the sound of a single gunshot, the gleaming knife flourished by the murderer, the leap to the stage, the cry of Sic Semper Tyrannis, his escape into the wings, his galloping horse, and the President of the United States on the floor of a theater gone mad.
Reenactors in Civil War-era clothing have marked the date in the area around the theater.
My collar, my pin, my glove, my bonnet. I have to be proper.
Ford's Theater is hosting a tribute performance, tours, and a panel discussion in Lincoln's honor.
I love Abraham Lincoln, and I wanted to commemorate this monumental date.
Lincoln is universally, among historians, the greatest president the country ever had.
Lincoln does live to this day. He lives in what he would call the better angels of our nature. The man who liberated 4 million enslaved people lives on in every sacrifice women and men of courage make for freedom and justice.
Up next, Catholic University of America here in D.C. remembers Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who spent years there. And we bring you the story of a family crediting Archbishop Sheen with the miracle of their baby's life.
George Washington will always be the father of our country. But Abraham Lincoln will always be its savior.
The great communicator, Venerable Archbishop Fulton Sheen on President Abraham Lincoln. Today, April 15th, exactly 150 years since Lincoln's death, the day after he was shot at Ford's Theater. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick, and we remember 2 great men today. Catholic University of America here in D.C. is remembering Fulton Sheen this week. CUA celebrates the legacy of its alum with a classroom dedication and exhibit on his life. Bishop Sheen taught religion and philosophy at Catholic University for 23 years before becoming one of the most prominent U.S. Catholic evangelists of all time. This year marks 75 years since his first TV appearance. Sheen went on to win an Emmy for his show Life is Worth Living, drawing as many as 10 million viewers each week. Sister Maria Frassati Jakupcak is co-chair of the Catholic University of America's Fulton Sheen Legacy Committee. Sister, what kind of impact do you hope this exhibit has, especially on the students at CUA?
Well, I think the main thing is that we're sort of filling in a gap about Fulton Sheen's life that people don't normally talk about. And he spent 23 years at Catholic University. And I think it's important for our students to know that they share this institution with a man of such great holiness and zeal and creativity. And they think it's cool that, you know, he won an Emmy and he is up for sainthood and he went here and he prayed in our chapel, he taught in our classrooms. So I think that that's the main thing, that I would just like them to learn more about him.
It is cool. I remember watching him on television when I was a kid. So he is often referred to as a pioneer of the new evangelization. That's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. In the 1920s, when radio was an emerging medium, he was there to use radio to preach the gospel. He started preaching regularly on the Catholic Hour radio show in 1930. In 1940, he was on the very first religious telecast ever in New York City for Easter Sunday. So it's the 75th anniversary of his first appearance on television this year.
So what would you say about his legacy? How would you describe it?
I think that he shows the importance of personal preparation for those involved in the new evangelization. So not only did he study a great deal to prepare his broadcasts, and he used to say he spent an hour preparing every minute he was on the air. But he also was a man of deep prayer and holiness, and the importance that he stressed on the daily holy hour and his own personal conversion. And I think the Holy Fathers have been saying that about the new evangelization, is that it really has to start here with the individual before we can go out to others. And I think Sheen is a great model of that.
I loved when he acknowledged his writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Absolutely, when he won the Emmy.
What is the status of Archbishop Sheen's sainthood right now, the cause?
Right. Well, his cause is currently on hold, but it had been moving along very promisingly. He's been declared venerable, which means found worthy of living a life of heroic virtue, and that's worthy of imitation. And then there's a miracle that's been approved. A miracle has to be approved 3 times. This one has been approved twice by a board of medical experts and board of theologians. The last approval comes from the Holy Father. This particular miracle involves the raising to life of a boy who was stillborn and showed no signs of life for 61 minutes. So, but at the moment, the Diocese of Peoria, who's running his cause, and New York, who has the body, are sort of in a dispute over who has the rights to Sheen's body. So, but I'm confident it will be resolved. I talked to Father Andrew Apostoli about it just yesterday, and he said, "Sister, if he can raise a boy from the dead, he can resolve this problem."
It'll all work out.
Exactly.
All right, Sister, thank you so much for joining us and reminding us of this incredible holy man.
Great, thank you.
Well, as Sister mentioned, the cause for Archbishop Fulton Sheen's sainthood is on hold, but tonight we revisit Jason Calvi's story from last spring, exploring the miracle that could propel him to the title of blessed.
He was stillborn, but now this baby boy plays.
I mean, it's still somebody being raised from the dead.
James Fulton Engstrom was born with no heartbeat back in September 2010.
I was totally shutting down and going into shock.
Parents Bonnie and Travis prayed to a man born 30 minutes away, Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
Please pray for this son. You know, he's gone.
In my head, I said Fulton Sheen's name over and over again.
An hour passed.
He was hooked up to heart monitors, and they did sonograms of his heart, and it wasn't moving.
After the 61 minutes, they were gonna, call time of death, and then all of a sudden his heart just came back.
The family needed more miracles. James spent 7 weeks in neonatal intensive care.
He would have massive organ failure from the severe lack of oxygen.
And so the Engstroms turned again and again to Archbishop Sheen.
Praying, very specific needs and intentions, as we went. There was just one thing after another just kept coming back, and he kept proving everybody wrong. And so now he's here.
Here, playing like other 3.5-year-olds.
We believe that Jesus Christ healed James, but we believe that Fulton Sheen's prayerful intercession played a very important role in that healing.
James's healing has been investigated by medical experts in the diocese and at the Vatican. Both found the case miraculous. This case now moves on to theologians, cardinals, and finally the Pope. If all approve this was a true miracle, then Sheen would be named a blessed, just one step away from sainthood. Throughout the pregnancy and even today, the family asks for Sheen's help.
Because we believe in the communion of saints, I still talk to him. So I spend a lot of time, actually. He's kind of one of my go-to saints where it's like, "Oh, Fulton, I don't know what to do about this. You better pray."
And there's a constant reminder of Fulton Sheen in little James Fulton.
Hopefully it brings more people to the faith.
Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. And James Fulton is now 4.5 and doing well. The EWTN News Nightly team thanks Mother Angelica, our network, and each of you for a major milestone. Thanks for 300. Tonight marks 300 original episodes of EWTN News Nightly. We've now been on every weeknight for almost a year and look forward to many more. Thanks again for 300. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, until tomorrow, number 301, I'm Brian Patrick as we leave you with these snapshots from today's general audience with Pope Francis. Good night and God bless you.